Good morning, friends. I'm Meghan LeVota, and today I want to talk a little bit about Millennial SJs and how they might seem a little different than other SJs, older generations of SJs, and how their type description might also be a little different than what you're used to. So if you don't know what SJs are, that would be ESFJ, ISFJ, ESTJ, or ISTJ in the Myers-Briggs. Or you might recognize this as one of Keirsey's temperaments, which I believe is called the Guardians for SJs. And what they all have in common is that they all prefer introverted sensing out of any other type of perceiving function. And if you think, and they're also all Js, and a lot of the times you'll notice about SJs is that the stereotypical view of Js fits SJs very well, even more so than NJs. And what I mean by stereotypical view of Js, I mean organized, structured, planning, like tidy, things like that. A lot of those things really do apply to SJs, and the reason why I say that they apply to SJs more than NJs is because NJs, they're organizing their intuitive world, and so a lot of times they might not even realize that they are organized in that way, because if you look around them, they might not have a planner, or they might not have the cleanest, might not be working in the cleanest environment, because that sort of thing externally or sensory tangible planning is not as important to an NJ. If you were to go on a vacation, it would be way more likely for an SJ to be the sort of person to come up with an itinerary of the vacation, where an NJ would just want to use extroverted sensing and go with the flow of the vacation. They don't really like to plan their sensory things, but they will plan their goals, their intuition, they'll think very much about like their ideas and planning them so that they go well. But anyway, this video is not about NJs, and so I'm not going to talk about them that much. Sorry, my eyes are really watery. But anyway, so in order to really know what a millennial SJ is, you're going to have to know what introverted sensing, how it really is. And no, SJs aren't just stuck in the past, and they aren't just, I think a lot of people might stereotype them as being not progressive, and in fact regressive in a lot of their ways, that they cling to what has worked for them, and they cling to their system that they're used to, and they don't really like change that much. And so I think that a lot of people, particularly intuitives, particularly NJs, might view SJs as pretty regressive, in fact, because they seem to always be clinging to their process as opposed to looking to the future in the way that NJs do. So SJs and NJs can sort of butt heads in that way. But SI, introverted sensing, is a very impressionable function. So it is soaking up their sensory environment and then coming up with a very subjective conclusion based on their sensory experience. And so a lot of SJs will be very prone to socialization in the world. If society says that this is what looks attractive and this is unattractive, then an SJ is going to absorb that and think that just because that's they'll think, because that's what I've always been taught, and that's what I've always experienced, that's what I've seen on TV, that's what I've seen in my high school, that's what I've seen on the billboards, like that is what reality is. And it'll be a little subjective based on their experience, and their culture is going to play a huge role. A lot of SJs seem to be really just take on whatever their culture sort of believes. And I'm not trying to say that SJs don't think for themselves. I'm not trying to say anything against SJs, because full disclosure, like, I'm an ENFJ, and so I have trouble really understanding the introverted sensing function. But from my experience, I do believe that they really do absorb their sensory environment and sort of make it mean something to them. And a lot of times they think that that is true, and that is how the world is. And they'll say, like, that's just how it is, that's just how the world is. For example, there have been societies of humans where it has been a matriarchal society, and there are different cultural norms about the different sexes in every country, even every state in the United States to some extent. But an SJ would be likely to say that's just how it's always been. How are we going to make the best with what we've got? Which is not really my perspective most of the time. But what I'm trying to say here with this video is that millennial SJs are really a lot more progressive than their older SJ successors, because the way that the world has been changing, no matter what country you're from, has been so rapid that honestly it's been like an SJ's worst nightmare, like the past few years, like with technology and stuff. An SJ would be the sort of person where it's like, oh man, I just was getting used to my iPhone 4, now you're telling me there's iPhone 5? Ugh. And the SJs are the ones that are like freaking out about the new Snapchat update because they don't know where things are and it's not organized to them. And every time technology changes and every time systems change, it's like the SJs that are like, why you gotta go and change this on me? Because they kind of really get into their routine, and they like to live their life with a routine. And because I think what they've really figured out is the power of habits, is that if you do something habitually, then it's not going to take as much energy, and then they can use that energy on other things, like serving people they love, which is a really SFJ thing, or like solving problems, which is more of an STJ thing, but both of them can do both. So when your culture has gone through so much change, you're gonna have to realize that it's gonna be really hard for SJs that are millennials to really pin down and say, this is the way the world is, this is the way things should work, because systems are crumbling all over the place. Like, technology is disrupting almost every single industry. The job market is crazy. There's like a skills gap. A lot of SJs might have wanted to go to college to get a communications degree or a business degree and enter corporate America right away because that's what their parents did. But now they're realizing, like, maybe that's not actually safe. And I think a lot of millennial SJs are almost having to adopt a more progressive worldview. Well, one, because the world is more progressive than it was like when your parents were born. I don't know how old you are listening, but when your parents were born, right now, it's more progressive than that. I mean, think about the way the social climate has changed, like what things we think are acceptable and what things we don't. If an SJ is brought up in this society right now, they're going to probably be a lot more politically correct than older SJs, because they are soaking up the sensory environment right now in the SE, but they're taking it in to decide what they think. And it's going to be subjective. Either an SJ is going to be way more politically correct than older ones, or they're going to be way more like freedom of speech, like I don't want to be politically correct on the other end. But they're going to interpret what's going on now and all the turmoil, and most SJs that I've met that are my age have adopted a way more worldly perspective, because we live in a global economy, you know, like with the telephone, the internet, you know, like these things that millennial SJs think is a given, it makes them way less closed-minded. And I'm not trying to diss on older SJs, but I want you to understand the way that SI works. It's not like inherently closed-minded, and it's not inherently like my way or the highway. It is, though, wanting to pick what works, what they think is the way the world is, and acting on accordance of that world. And they're going to be a little bit shattered if the world is slightly different than what they thought. But it's just like introverted functions are really complex. And so introverted sensing is just as complex as introverted intuition. It's not like they're just going to take things at face value and say that's the way the world works. They're going to look through all of their sensory experiences, all of their friends' sensory experiences, see what they see on TV, and like make this really complex, like using extroverted intuition, this really complex conclusion about how the sensory world is. I mean, some of this is simple. It's like, you know, the world is a globe. It goes around in circles. You know, there are seasons. Like these things, yes, you can conclude. And it is a more depth perception. That's actually a pretty good example. Extroverted sensing is likely to just be like, I'm in my room right now. Whereas introverted sensing might be more in depth of like, it's winter, the seasons are changing, like this is where the world is on this little axis thing, like just more thinking about a more in depth of what is going on right now, which I have a hard time even giving that example because I don't use strong introverted sensing. But it's going to be way deeper than just what you see on face value. It's going to be a way deeper conclusion based on not just their personal experience, but the personal experiences of their friends and things that they've gathered with their extroverted intuition. And so when society doesn't change for a very long time, or when there isn't the internet or any way of connecting with people that are different than you, then SJs from 100 years ago are going to really think that that is all there is, because it takes intuition, which is imagination, to imagine what could be different. And every SJ I know that's around my age or is a millennial is like basically forced to use their intuition every time Snapchat update changes. And they're like, oh gosh, like I don't even know how I'm supposed to talk to my friend. Like they're gonna have to imagine like how something's gonna be different. I know that seems really trivial, but you have to remember that sensors are just as complex as intuitives, but the things that they react to are in like the sensory world. So just because you might think that that's maybe some intuitives watching think it's dumb to freak out over the Snapchat change or something like that, they're having an intuitive reflection about the sensory thing that set them off. So and another reason why I wanted to make this video to really think is, one, to think differently about what SI even is, be a little bit more patient with SJs if you are disagreeing with them and you think that they're set in their ways. Understand how impressionable they are to the sensory world, and they can't really ever let go of a sensory experience that they perceived because it's all going into their database. It'd be like asking an NJ to forget that they had like this one spiritual epiphany 10 years ago that changed their perspective. Not gonna happen. Like to tell an SJ to get them to like forget the way things were when they were in school is really difficult. That's why a lot of them, I mean, like my ESTJ grandmother is like, I don't understand why they aren't teaching cursive in school. Like, how are kids gonna learn cursive? Like these things, I think a lot of young people and a lot of intuitives, and especially intuitive young people who are more progressive, are gonna just wanna tear their hair out and be like, the world is changing, oh my goodness. But the same point, they aren't really acknowledging the importance of those tools or of the way that things were back then. So yeah, intuitive, oh wait, not intuitive, okay, SJ millennials are a lot more progressive. They tend to be aware that people are different than you because they probably have met people different than them of different cultures, and at least in cities. I mean, even not in cities, if you have the internet, like, you're aware of other sensory experiences that aren't just like yours. And I think, honestly, that a lot of NPs that I know, so extroverted intuitives, they befriend a lot of these sort of SJs that are just more grounded, but they can still keep up with their NE, and a lot of times they mistype them as intuitives, because a lot of intuitives have this bias where they grow up and nobody understands them, and they assume that all of their friends must also be intuitive because, hey, you're one of the good ones, hey, you actually understand me. And so they just assume that their friends must also be intuitive because they feel on the same wavelength. And some SJs that I knew in college that were really, really intelligent and really aware of current affairs and really driven and stuff like that, they use their NE a lot because they kind of had to in today's society. I mean, they use it as much as I use my SE. You know, like, me making these videos is SE. Like, if I was just using NI, I would just be thinking about making videos all day. The fact that I have the force to even make a video is inherently me using extroverted sensing. Even though I'm an intuitive, I'm making something tangible in the real world. That's crazy. And yeah, sensors can do the same thing with their intuitive, or with their intuition. And I've noticed there's a lot of NPs that are typing their SJ friends that they get along with really well because they, you know, use the same perceiving functions as them, and they are just calling them NJs, which they're not. And yeah, especially NTPs. NTPs seem to get along with SJs a lot, and you guys are probably gonna say I'm wrong, but you know, whatever. I don't really care. There's not one thing I can say about NTPs that I'm not gonna get told is wrong, that I'm wrong. But anyway, yeah. Yeah, NPs love SI, and you all use it too. All of this thing that I was just saying about SJs, all of you NPs also use introverted sensing, so remember that. Remember that you might think, oh, this is ridiculous, I would never act that way, I'm always looking for other possibilities. Remember, though, NPs listening to this, that your introverted sensing makes you more impressionable to the sensory world than you might think, because everything you see you're gonna take in and then make something of it in your head. That's why NPs are such great storytellers. They create stories and ideas out of their life. They make it mean something, which NJs don't really do that. NJs won't really take the sensory world and make it mean something necessarily. Okay, I know I worded that weird. Not in the same way as SJs, where as people who use introverted sensing might think, this person broke up with me, that must mean that I am undesirable. And then they'll like jot down like this sensory experience, the time I realized I was undesirable, and they'll like move on. And it's like they'll make some sort of like NE sweeping conclusion based on like that's very subjective, based on a very subjective sensory experience, but it means something to them from their perspective. From their perspective, I felt undesirable, and they might like use that as like kind of baggage or like as kind of a reminder the next time they do something else, and as opposed to taking it as just a one-off thing, which extroverted sensing will kind of take a sensory experience as like a one-off chance thing, when introverted sensing won't do that. Everything's connected. Everything in the sensory world, it's one reality, and maybe I'm undesirable from this person or desirable from this person, then they'll have to make them all work together because they string all of their sensory experiences together. And NPs do this too, just more subconsciously. And NPs are more likely to take risks and go against what their sensory world has said, but they're still gonna feel it. So anyway, SJs, especially millennial SJs, are more than you think. They're more complex than you think, and I think that I get along with millennial SJs that are really smart and have learned a lot about the way the world is now and have some ideas about how things should work that's a better structure than what it is now. I think that I love talking to them. So anyway, thank you for watching. Please join my Facebook group that I will link below. It's called Personality Typology for Self-Growth. I can't talk, oh my goodness. And yeah, and we talk about how we use each of the cognitive functions how you could use each of the cognitive functions to become more aware of yourself and the evolution that's happening within you, and as you are starting to bloom into the person that you know you can be. And personality type is a tool for that. It's not a way to put yourself in a box. It is a way to open the box so that you can understand yourself even more than you did before. And also, if you like this video and you want me to make more like this, or if you want me to up the quality of my videos, please consider supporting me on Patreon, and I'll also link that below. All right, thank you. Have a good day.